Citizen Kane is arguably the most influential film ever made. Although it might not be my most influential movie, for me, 2001: A Space Odyssey influenced me the most personally, but cinematically, Citizen Kane has been the most impactful. But the film was also a subject of tons of controversy, most notably the fuss behind the writing credit. The film Mank, directed by David Fincher and written by his late father Jack Fincher, is a story about that. Or is it? Mank's and Orson Welles' dispute over the writing credit is well known among all the film buffs. It has also been a subject of the controversial essay by the film critic Pauline Kael called Raising Cain. And at a first glance, I thought this film at its core will be about the same thing. But it's not. It's more of a biopic of Herman J. Mank's life during the 30s, and I'll get to that part later as I do have some issues with that, but for now I'm gonna talk about what I liked. I loved the way this film was shot. The cinematography was very reminiscent of Citizen Kane. Not only the deep focused long shots, but certain shots were just meant to mirror certain scenes from Citizen Kane. I loved how much work was done in the post to give it that look of a film made in the 40s, especially if you notice the lighting. Whenever there was a light emitting object in the scene, it was made to look more exposed and it added a glare to it, much like the films in that era. But one thing I didn't get, if David Fincher was really going for that look, why didn't he go for that 4:3 aspect ratio? I mean, I didn't really understand why he went with that wide aspect ratio. For me, it didn't really complete the look they were going for. Another thing that I liked, that audio had an echo to it like those old films.
Your family, your cronies, liquor. I gave you a second chance.
Speaking of audio, I must say the score was excellent. It was again very reminiscent of that era and Citizen Kane. It was a very jazzy score which perfectly blended with the scenes. Speaking of being reminiscent of Citizen Kane, I loved the flashback narrative of Citizen Kane it followed, where we get to know about our main character more through the flashbacks. All this really shows how passionate Fincher was about this project, not only because the screenplay was written by his late father, but also because of his love for the cinema of this era. Okay, so I cannot really go further without talking about the performances here. At this point, do I even need to say how good Gary Oldman was in this film? He is one of the greatest actors of this era, and I don't think I ever disliked any of his performance. I mean, it takes an actor like Gary Oldman who has such a recognizable face, but yet whenever I see a performance by him, I totally see a different face. I was also really impressed by the performances of Amanda Seyfried, Charles Dance, Lilly Collins, and Arliss Howard. Specifically Charles Dance, who was just so commanding on screen. He was just lighting up the screen in all his scenes. Now, there was a specific performance I was really looking forward to, but when I watched the film, I realized he had a very limited screen time, and that was Tom Burke as Orson Welles. Despite his limited screen time, he was enchanting on the screen, and he really mesmerized me as Orson Welles. And I think he totally nailed the voice. I don't know if they enhanced his voice later in the post-production, but I believe it was all him.
Mank, it's Orson Welles.
Now I do have a fair share of problems with this film. To start off, this film assumes that you know a lot of things. The state of USA during the Great Depression, politics at that time, and what was Hollywood's place between all this. You need to know all that to fully enjoy this film, otherwise you'll feel aloof from the narrative. For me, because of that, the film really dragged in the middle. I was disconnected with the film during that part. See, I'm an Indian and I don't know anything about American politics during the 30s, and I only half-heartedly read about the Great Depression in my textbooks years ago. I would have liked it more if the film elaborated on it instead of just expanding on that, assuming that we know everything it's expanding on. Although for the first and the final act, I was really involved, but I lost my interest in the middle. Okay, so earlier I talked about how this film was more of a biopic of Mank during the 30s, and it was not at all the Mank vs. Kane film I thought it would be. Although I was more interested in the latter, but on paper I don't really have a problem with a biopic of a person in a particular decade and him writing a screenplay based on the people he observed during that decade. But the thing is, there is one thing I've seen common in almost every biopic. That is, they are very one-sided with their approach, and Mank is no exception. I know we are seeing things from his perspective, but there is no nuance to it in my opinion, and we never really get to see the other side.
Please call me Mank.
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 This is Herman Mankiewicz, but we're to call him Mank.
Mankiewicz.
David Fincher's Mank might be a visual masterpiece, but it's targeted towards a niche audience who are well versed with the history of that era. You can still watch it and have a good time with it if you're a fan of Citizen Kane like I am, but I don't think it's a casual viewer's cup of tea. Thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you think about Mank in the comments below. And for those who are new to this channel, please subscribe, that will really help me a lot. Thank you once again, and I'll be back shortly with the next video.